Where'd she go?
Kind of, but not really. You guys ready? Okay, I'd like to call to order the April meeting of the New Garden Township Board of Supervisors. If you could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, just so everyone's aware, we held and then immediately closed the conditional use hearing for the 138 Church Street property. It will be continued to the May 20th at 5 p.m. meeting. So if you're interested, you can come then. And next up, we have public comment. Any public comment? Nope. Okay. And then we have a recognition of the completion of Jacob Sharp's Eagle project. So if you'd like to come up, Jacob.
Good evening, everyone. Going to be presenting the formal recognition to Jacob Sharp this evening for the completion of his Eagle Scout project. Just so I don't miss anything, I'm going to read directly from the staff recommendation because I think there's some great information here. So I'll just give you some background. Jacob, a member of Troop 62, conducted an Eagle Scout project involving the installation of 3 informational kiosks. Probably one of them is right out front, and you can see it as you walk in. They are strategically placed throughout both phases of New Garden Park, one in the front of Town Hall here, and the remaining 2 within the lower phases of New Garden Park. Each kiosk serves as a valuable resource to the township and community by providing essential information to all park goers, hikers, and nature enthusiasts. The kiosk design blends seamlessly with the park's natural beauty and includes features such as a shingled roof, rustic wooden panels, and an enclosed bulletin board. These elements not only serve a practical purpose, but also contribute to the park's aesthetic appeal. All 3 kiosks were completed in June of 2023 and have been heavily utilized by staff to offer details about the park's trails, wildlife, historical landmarks, safety guidelines, and rules and regulations. So, Jacob, on behalf of New Garden Township, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you for a job well done. We have a little recognition plaque for you here. Thank you very much. Fine job.
Sorry, Jacob, putting you on the spot.
Yeah, that's good.
And I skipped over it, but did we have any executive sessions to announce? Didn't think so. Yep. Okay, and then we have no presentations and approval of meeting minutes from March 18th. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Yep. All right, thank you very much. And we have a treasurer's report, the approval of paid invoices in the amount of $57,235.46 and unpaid invoices in the amount of $1,002,541.02 for a total of $1,059,776.48. You have a motion for that?
I'll make a motion to approve the paid and unpaid invoices in such amount.
Okay, second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I'm gonna recuse from two invoices, $255 and $440.90, which is for my employer. The rest of the bills I am in favor of paying.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and we have the public safety report from the Avondale Fire Company.
All right, as you can see for the first quarter, 2024, that's the calls in New Garden Township. Totals, totals 54 calls out of 106 calls for 2024, 54 calls being in New Garden Township. Yeah, 53, I'm sorry, yeah. So, yeah, okay, so 53 calls were in New Garden Township. The calls of service, as you can see here, January was pretty busy. We had most of the calls in, or I'm sorry, yeah, January, then February, March, you can see the color codes here in the bottom left-hand corner. Right-hand corner is the calls that we had in the township. Most of them were, looks like auto accidents. 6 auto accidents. Looks like that was the most in January, and then 4 auto accidents in February and 2 auto accidents in March. So it looks like we're running more auto accidents than anything. So that'd be good for that unless somebody has any questions. And this is for EMS, kind of confusing with the lines here, but we went back all the way to 20, which is the red line. 21 would be the, I guess, the brown color line. The green line's 2022, 2023 is Bowling Green. Actually, the green line is 2024. So, yeah, the green line should be 2024. But you can see we've had 468 calls so far to date in New Garden Township. So. That's it, Brady. We had 303 calls, actually, for the report that I just got fresh off the printer, 303 calls in New Garden Township. We need to adjust that. Might have been dispatch calls and everything would have been total to 468. We're still transporting most of the clientele to Christiana Hospital with Jennersville still being shut down. Turnaround's about still an hour and 20 minutes roughly for a call from start to finish. Staff-wise, we have been filling the shifts pretty good. Looks like in January, we filled 229 out of 240. February, we covered 209 out of 224 shifts. And in March, we did 221 out of 238 shifts. That, what I'm saying shifts-wise, that was full coverage with the 5 in the daytime, 3 overnight. So, if anybody has any questions there, I'll try to. The blue line, as you can see, is Bowling Green in. There's still calls. Yeah, I think it's slowed down a little bit this month. I don't know why. We had one there today, but it's kind of slowed down a little bit. Don't want to say that too loud, but. Here's a fire and EMS budget. As you can see, EMS budget income is 303, expenses was 339. Actuals was 274, expenses was 293,000. Fire budget. The reason why you see the fire budget is income, expenses, but if you look at the bottom actual, the reason why that 486 is so high is we sold the rescue truck for $285,000. We put $200,000 into a CD that's paying 5%. Put $30,000 into the truck fund, and then we put Relief had to get an expenditure back of $28,500 for their portion of the sale of the truck. So that's why that's so high. You'll see a difference in that the next quarter, I'm sure. And the only other thing I got is I just got this today too, just printed it off before I came up. For the first quarter, meeting hours total was 344, training hours 524, duty crew hours was 6,336, and call hours total 2,423. So I can give you a copy of this if anybody would have it for the record, so I can make sure it's on there next time. Questions, comments? Thank you. Thank you for your support.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to introduce Chief Joe Greenwald.
So what you're getting ready to see is the first quarter calls for service. It's going to be the first slide that pops up. The way that we do our report is broken down by municipalities, which we cover. The blue column will be New Garden Township. The middle would be Avondale, and the red would be West Grove. And then your quarter 1 2024 totals will be under the yellow block. So for the first quarter, just calls for service were 600 in New Garden Township. About, excuse me, about 90 of those were in relation to Bowling Green. Well, that's not up there. I did make a side note of it. Our calls for service are up from this time in 2023 from 671 to 750. So they're up nearly 12% from the same quarter in 2023. If you could go to the Part 2 crimes, or Part 1 crimes. Part 1 crimes report, you'll see in the first quarter of 2024, there were 8 in New Garden Township, none in Avondale Borough, and 2 in West Grove. Again, it's important to point out, Part 1 crimes are your more serious crimes, your Part 1 felonies. We're down from this same exact period of 2023. We're down 37%. So we attribute that to visibility, proactive enforcement, and thorough follow-up investigations from our detective division when there's a serious crime committed. For Part 2 crimes, sorry, I should have noted that. Don't worry about going back, Chris. I have it right here. So in New Garden, there were 6 thefts are considered Part 1 crimes. There were 6 thefts and 2 burglaries in New Garden Township in the first quarter. For your Part 2 crimes, you had a total of 37 in New Garden Township. Your 1 in Avondale Borough and 5 in West Grove. In New Garden Township, just ones to point out are the simple assaults. Some of those are domestic related assaults, but they still go in the simple assault category for UCR crime reporting. Sex offenses were 1, frauds were 5, 8 drugs. Drugs is considered Part 2 crime. 2 trespass and 5 other, which are just miscellaneous crimes that are not up on the board. As I talk about trends, it's important to note that Part 2 crimes are down 43.8% when compared to the first quarter of 2023. So hopefully we see this as a plateau between Part 1 and Part 2 crimes going down. Hopefully, if we can't continue to see it continue to decrease, we can at least keep it there because they are pretty good numbers. We like to say New Garden Township is a safe place to live right now. So the next slide is the traffic report. In New Garden Township in the first quarter of 2024, there were 734 citations issued, 96 in Avondale and 89 in West Grove Borough. When compared to 2023, there were 314 citations issued in New Garden, 32 in Avondale, and 43 to New Garden. It's important to say that there's been a lot of changes in the police department, one being the addition to a second person in the traffic safety unit. If you live in New Garden Township, you know that commercial vehicle issues have been a problem and continue to be. So a lot of those citations that you see are from the traffic safety unit, and I have how many of those in a later piece of paper. It's not on the slide, but I will tell you how many of those 734 citations are from the traffic safety unit. Warnings are up from the same period in 2023, 342 from 290. And DUIs are actually down from 19 to 15. So we have for total quarter 1 for the entire department, your 919 citations and 389, 516 warnings. Slide. So this is accidents. I think that we are seeing a decrease in accidents overall as a result, a continuing decrease because of the enforcement that we have. I mean, going back, a few years ago, we were simply built to respond to calls. Now that we've added additional personnel and traffic safety, and there's also a school resource officer that's out there in the summertime when he's not at school doing the same type of action. So we hope that our accidents continue to decrease. We feel like that's a result of visibility and proactive policing as well. So 54 total accidents in New Garden Township for the first quarter of 2024. And as you can see, if you go over to the quarter 1 compared to the quarter 1 in 2023, we're down from 76 to 70. And then when compared to 2022, we're down from 81. The next slides are, this is a report that's actually generated from Chester County Department of Emergency Services. And when I talk about total calls for service in New Garden Township being 600, it's actually more along the lines of about 1,700. We gather our data from our report management system, which is any incident that we handled that needed a report generated. When actual dispatches, and to include traffic stops, school checks, a lot of the self-initiated things, New Garden's actually at 1,787 incidents. What you see here at the very top is for the last quarter total police department activity. And this is not just New Garden, this is all three municipalities. It was 2,413 interactions or dispatches and include traffic stops. If you go to the next slide, please. You'll see that out of those 1,787 of those are New Garden Township. So when you add this 2,400 for first quarter of 2024 and the all of 2023, which is about over 8,000 calls, there's about 10,000 interactions. So as I talk about trends, what I wanted to point out was the fact that we have not had one citizen's complaint lodged against our police officers while they're out there during these interactions, and I give all of the police officers credit for that. I think that's the last slide. Am I right, Craig? Just some things I wanted to add. I said I would talk about how many of those citations were to the traffic safety unit. That was 502 of those citations, and 198 of those warnings were specific to the traffic safety unit, who do speed details, their commercial vehicle, which is considered MIXAP certified. So those officers are out there every day trying to handle all of the complaints that come in through either the manager or some of the border supervisors that get calls and residents calling in. I know that Newark Road and Scotts has been problematic for just about everybody. And I also know that the detour from the bridge in Avondale has posed a problem for residents on Newark Road and all the other secondary corridors. So I do appreciate your patience as we deal with that. We can only be so many places at the same time. However, I hope you notice that the increase in citations issued shows you we're doing exactly what we can because we can't get them all. Actually, while we have them stopped, you have them pointing at other trucks saying, why aren't you stopping them? Well, because we have you stopped, right? So we can't stop everyone, and we recognize that, but we are doing what we can. Serge, you have a question about that?
You still can't use your.
Not in the state of Pennsylvania, no. It's at the point in House now, which is the furthest that it's been, but unfortunately, every time it's made it to House for vote, it's gotten pushed down. And the reason isn't because of police departments like yours, the Southern Chester County Regional. It's actually for departments out there that are part-time police departments that may only have 1 to 5 guys on or officers on, that really that's all that they're going to do and use it as a revenue building tool. So there's a lot of revisions. It's not that they necessarily don't want municipal police departments to possess radar as a tool. It's that there's revisions to it that they're not comfortable with releasing right now. It makes no sense to me either, but.
In the house, and I said, tell me, you trust them with a revolver, but you won't trust them with a radar. How does that make sense?
It doesn't in a lot of ways, but we're. The question was, is the radar gun legal in the state of Pennsylvania for municipal police departments? The answer is no. Only the Pennsylvania State Police are currently allowed to use the radar. I just wanted to talk about some department updates. Right now, we're in the process of hiring 1 new police officer, and that's because West Goshen Township hired 1 of our police officers. So we're in the process of making that replacement now. We're waiting for the arrival of our new uniforms. With our new, we've had the same uniforms now for over 7 years. So we're waiting for our new uniforms to get there. And with that will come a new department insignia, and we're looking for a total rebrand. So there'll be different colors, different patch, different insignias, for letterhead and such. So we're waiting for all that to get finalized. We're also waiting on the arrival of 3 new police vehicles that were ordered back in August or September. It's just where we're at right now with production. We'll also, I was talking to Mr. Gall earlier about some body worn camera footage. We received a grant also in the first quarter that was applied for back in 2023 from Chrissy Houlihan's office. It's a federal grant for $117,000 to equip the police department with all new Axon slash Taser body worn cameras and Taser, which is the less lethal device. So that will pretty much fully fund the $161,000 purchase that we just turned into a purchase order last month. So waiting on those. I already said that nearly 90 of the calls were for Bowling Green. And if you don't follow us on Facebook or our Crime Watch page, please do so. Facebook is simply our name, Southern Chester County Regional Police Department. And if you want to access our Crime Watch page, you can do so through Facebook and www.sccrpd.org. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because we've started posting weekly incident blotters where it'll just go on there and tell you the highlighted incidents that we handled, not every incident, but some of the highlighted incidents and some of the more serious arrests that take place by our police department. So please feel free to go on and follow us there for further information. And our first quarter report in length will be released by the end of the month. And that's all I had unless there were any questions.
Any questions? Yeah. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you. Great work. You and the department. Thanks.
Yeah. Mr. Gall?
Chris, the two respective quarterly reports, will they be located for access on the township's website?
Both of these are in the actual agenda for tonight, so the public agenda has both reports.
Separate from the agenda and placed on the website?
I can parse them out if that would help, then yes, yeah, we can do that, but we'll have to kind of configure a space for them. So it'll take a little bit of time to kind of get things kind of organized, but yeah, we can do that and update them in a quarterly performance kind of footprint, if that helps. Okay. Soon be available makes sense, yeah.
Okay, so we have no unfinished business, so we're going to move on to new business. First up is the Avondale Fire Company and Southern Chester County Emergency Services fiscal year 2024 quarter two appropriation.
This is just the second scheduled payment for FY '24. Same quarterly appropriation amount and 4 even distributions between all 3 fire, EMS, and Southern Chester County EMS budgeted items. So if the board has any inputs for this one, but we wanted to start marrying these up with actual public safety reports. So it's just kind of all discussion points as well as the actual appropriations happening in one meeting.
Okay, great.
Per quarter.
Any discussions?
No, I'll make the motion to approve the appropriation in the amount of $246,187.50. And that's broken down for the Avondale Fire Company and Avondale Ambulance and Southern Chester County EMS.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Motion passes. Okay. Yes.
Wanted to confirm this actually just second quarter.
That is correct. Yeah, there'll be 4 quarterly payments rolling every quarter. So first one's in January, April, and then quarterly all the way through the end of the year. Yep.
So it would be 334 divided by 4, 560 divided by 4. That's correct.
Yes, in terms
Yeah.
of our
Right.
itemized adopted budget items per entity.
Okay. Then we have the Kennett Library fiscal year 2024 appropriation.
Yeah, so I'll make the motion to approve the appropriation of $182,600 to the Kennett Library, and that, for clarification, is $100,000 for the building, and that's a single annual contribution for 5-year commitment. And then the $82,600 is for the tax, and that goes for the operation part of the new building and the staff.
And To clarify, this is the fourth payment of 5 total budgeted payments that was committed to back in, I guess in this case, FY '21 timeframe to support the capital, which in this case, the actual construction of the building and of itself. And so this will be the fourth out of 5 total payments for this fiscal year. And of course, the taxes from the .1 referendum that was budgeted for the 82.6.
Correct. That's my motion.
Great. Do you have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. All right, passes unanimously. Okay, next we have a zoning hearing board application from Blittersdorf.
Oh, yeah, Debbie.
Good evening, Debbie Shulsky on behalf of the Blittersdorfs, who are also with me this evening, as well as our engineer, Rich Nativity. Dad, in case you have any questions about the scope of the application, fairly straightforward. We were before your planning commission to explain it to them as well. And they were in support of the application. Basically, you're probably all very familiar with this property. It's been an existing use within the municipality since the 1980s. The scope of the use isn't changing at all. The location of the use isn't changing. The applicant is simply putting a pole barn to enclose some of the use that's currently on the property. So we're going before the zoning hearing board, not as to the use, but as to the aspect of the barn itself, the vertical extension covering the use. Oh, sure, certainly. So currently we're happy to have, I know our engineer has a plan if you would like to see it, but the use itself is currently, the closest part of the use that's existing on the property today is 23 feet from the property's southern and western property lines and approximately 20.9 feet from the northern property line. So the pole barn, which is in the, I guess that's the southwest corner to the left, is going consistent with where the existing fence is. There's an existing fence there now that's enclosing the structure. So we will be, it will remain, the scope of, because the use is non-conforming, the property, the size of the lot is non-conforming as to the lot area. Obviously, there's a corresponding difference with respect to the setbacks. So the setbacks are 100 feet for this particular use from any residential district, which is currently non-conforming. And we're going to be, the proposal will be 26.1 feet from the southern property line and 93.6 feet from the western property line. So we're going to be, you know, like I said, it's already further where the existing use is now. It's already encroaching more than what we're proposing with the pole barn.
Okay. Any questions from the board? No? Any questions from the public? No?
It's going to be a new pole barn building? Correct, yes. The use is not changing at all. So it's really just enclosing the use that's there now. You're welcome.
Yeah, I don't know, what did the planning commission do, Robert?
Sorry.
What did the planning commission recommend?
Planning commission was fine. They recommended
With their support, support it, yeah.
We always, for these, kind of make a motion to
Either-
take no position.
Take no position or support.
Support or object to it, so whatever.
I have to recuse.
Say again?
So Chris, we got
Recusal.
to recuse
Yeah.
because Tom's on the board.
Oh, right, okay.
But what's the pleasure of the other supervisors? Take no position, support, or oppose?
Take no position.
We have a motion to take no position or a second to take no position?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye on take no position. Aye. Any opposed? Nope. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have the investment income update from Chris.
Fails on me. You might have to be on clicker.
Okay.
Oh, wait, hold on, let me see. Oh, I got
We're
it.
good? All right.
We're good.
Unnecessary.
All right, good evening, members of the board, residents. My name is Chris Himes, I'm the New Garden Township Manager. And tonight I will be briefing just a commonly, I guess in this case, inquiry to the township whenever we have these public discussions. And we always mention kind of how we're working to incorporate and fold in as much interest income we have from our investable cash that we have within the township. And of course, the biggest resource for that right now being the continual kind of dividends of roughly the $22.1 million still remaining intact from the sewer sale as kind of the primary construct of our interest income strategy. So to kind of, lift the curtain a little bit and open it up for questions to kind of show what the township's mindset and some, we'll call them deliberate, intentional kind of components of our investment income strategy. Based off of just all of the factors that dictate how local governments can make investments in the first place and where we have these resources, considering all of our available net cash. So we'll go through a very fun process here. I know everyone's really excited to talk about this. But all starting out, so overall, when you think about what your net cash position, that is inclusive of everything of restricted and unrestricted funds. So your fund balance accounts come from all sources of revenues, all sorts of tax kind of inroads that we have. So in addition to just property taxes, what would be kind of considered to be an unrestricted one, we just mentioned the fact that the library has an $82,600, and that's a restricted fund because that has to be earmarked for library use. So just kind of parsing out the words right there just to make sure we're all on the same page. But in all, right now, we have a net cash position of $33 million, of which 70% of that is from the sewer sale balance, that $22.1 million. And I'll just call it the sewer investment fund. We'll just kind of create a common nomenclature so we're all on the same page. But with that, the remaining component of it, $10.2 million, is what I would consider to be a split kind of right down the middle between unrestricted and restricted funds. So with that, the primary part of our unrestricted funds comes from fund balance available from our general fund. So if we had just annual surpluses, then we're able to kind of transfer remaining surplus from that year into our fund balance for general fund. That builds that fund balance up. Capital and capital reserve, those are more dependent upon whatever kind of, I'll call them deliberate intent for a 5-year capital plan. These are kind of deliberate transfers into your capital fund solely for the purpose of investment into rehabilitating infrastructure, funding projects, that kind of matter. So you normally don't keep an exorbitant balance within your capital fund. You kind of just intentionally put stuff there in order to be able to either A, temporarily fund cash projects that might be kind of fully cash, or they have to have a grant funding with a reimbursement. You have to fund all of the project up front and then seek reimbursements to replenish. So there's a lot of reasons why you would have an existing cash capital fund balance in and of itself. But regardless, right now, both of those right now equate to about a $2.5 million split evenly between both general and capital fund. And then we have a small capital reserve fund, which is for us right now, that is what we put in from our transfers of our annual revenues. Think of that as just the side cash account, and then we actually take money from capital reserve and put it in the capital fund to fund projects. So that's kind of our buildable balance that we try to do year over year with annual transfers of revenue. And of course, with that in our budget this year, our transfer amount from general fund revenues into our capital reserve was adopted budget of about $243,000. And that's one that we recognized during the budget process that while that's kind of a dip from prior years, it's something that we're trying to grow back because, of course, we have a lot of, we'll call them unfunded capital items out there, specifically with stormwater projects. And it's one where if we're ever going to be serious about addressing some of those issues, as well as some other larger sizable infrastructure issues related to kind of some transportation improvement projects, it's one where 243 is probably not going to be sufficient enough with, we'll call it some of the stay of limitations on grant funding resources that are out there. So more to follow on that. Another one to kind of bring up everybody up to speed is just what are the guidelines about how we invest in the first place? So some of this is just your own appetite. Some of this is more restricted to Commonwealth and second-class township code and regulations in terms of just what you're allowed to put money into. So for us, we just kind of think of a framework from top to bottom. These are kind of in order of ascending priority, but legality, safety, liquidity, and yield. I think they're pretty much, for the most part, pretty straightforward, especially specifically with legality and safety. You want to make sure that you're doing it within the confines of what you are regulated to do, as well as with safety. You want to make sure that the preservation of the principle is kind of always kept intact. And then you basically look for what your appetite is based off of just what the rate environment is and what the credit risk type environments are. And then, of course, liquidity is also, we raise money in order to fund projects. That's the kind of major purpose for a lot of our, or in this case, operating fund as well. But for us as a government, it's to build additional revenue that we can replace tax revenue in order to fund either operations or to fund projects. That's kind of the reason the business of our local government exists for the most part, in order to provide those community services. And then, of course, yield. It's how much you're attempting to forecast to get in the future, and then structuring those rolling dates to make sure that that forecasted budget revenue meets expected revenue, so you don't end up in a shortage. Because then if you end up in a shortage, you got to dip into these these cash reserves. So it's always kind of a blend of everything kind of coming together, and it's always part of the fact that you have to have a really specific plan in place, and you have to stay disciplined to it. And of course, later on in the meeting, as part of that discipline is part of your, we'll call it regulatory environment, which is what I like to call fiscal policy, that is kind of adopted by the township. And of course, we'll talk about the inroads of that later on in the agenda tonight. So with that, common question I get is, who is our investment? We'll call it group, trust, firm, whoever. So for us, we use Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust. Think of this as kind of like a multi-jurisdictional investment group constructed of all of the representatives from the represented municipalities and of themselves that sit on the board and advise kind of what the kind of common products that they seek to adopt in order to be able to get the amount of returns that they're trying to do. So it's a long way of saying it's a lot of other local governments that have the same kind of risk-adverse appetite, and the whole point is to make sure that everything is solvent and sufficient enough to meet the needs of the amount of money rolling into the fund of itself with the amount of money invested and coming out on the opposite side. We also have them for our P card program. So P card is our purchase card. Think of it as kind of a wholesale option for us to get kind of like a rebate viable kind of output based upon the amount of our total card spend. So it's kind of like a credit card type policy, but it's a product through Pliget, which offers a lot of benefits for us as well. So recently I gave a update to one of the HOAs, and I thought this was a pretty useful slide. So I figured I'd bring it out here into a larger kind of public forum. But this is kind of a neat way to kind of position all the different fund types that we have, how much are in those balances, tracking year-over-year expenditures from those funds, and then also talking about what it means between restricted, unrestricted, and kind of also the noise, we'll call it the noise, but the gravity of the size of how much that sewer sale balance provides, because right now it is our entire strategy. Having that thing completely intact in the current lending, or I mean, the current rate environment is giving us a lot of useful value the way it currently is right now. But it's only because A, the rates are what they are, and B, it's the size of the magnitude of the entire investable funds in and of itself. Because you'll see if you lose that, your investable cash net returns go, basically they plummet. So from there, I'd like to start at kind of the top. And this is more of the reasons that we talked about all of the budget discussions last fall. But essentially, the township was burning a lot of cash. And that was because we had never had revenues that met our expenditures. So we were structuring the use of our own cash to fund our operating fund. And of course, since a lot of our operating fund is just common commodities and consumables and payroll, we usually spend that money because that is the one that we are obligated to spend to fund services. So of course, over the course of the last 3 years, we were losing that net fund balance position. Now we'll talk later about fiscal policy of how much fund balance you should have in the first place. The good news is in terms of best management practices for, we'll call it like a general finance officers association kind of percentage base, this equates to about 35% of our net in-year spend appetite, and that's kind of right around the threshold that you want to be. So 2.5 million is kind of where we want to build a fund balance reserve position up to. We just kind of spent down to get there. Regardless, we're at 35% pretty much right now. So the goal should be at that 35% is to keep this intact. Capital, that's just more indicative of the types of projects that we've been funding. A lot of this, of course, comes from, especially the jump from 22 to 23, a sizable investment for our road improvement program. Part of it coming out of the interest income, part of it coming out of cash, part of it coming out of liquid fuels. Nonetheless, we put a priority on funding infrastructure. Now, this is great, but it's one where without those additional transfers from our tax revenues and other revenues coming back in the capital fund, this is an insolvent position. So at some point, we're going to have to fund this at a higher level or lean out our capital appetite. Something's going to have to adjust there. In terms of our enterprise funds are restricted funds. These are ones that kind of have that kind of encapsulated use, if you will. The airport fund, that's funded with revenues coming from the services provided by the airport. So their net surplus position goes back to fund their own airport fund. And of course, the airport fund is the source of local share money that helps fund the percentage obligated by the airport to fund capital. So it's like if you get like $1 million and it's like a 10% local match, the airport fund has to provide $100,000 to get the entire 1 million cost of the project done. And usually a federal grant covers the rest of the 900,000. So 90-10, pretty good distribution in terms of value add there. You just have to keep something on hand to fund your portion of it year over year. And that's not every year, that's just when those projects come about. Open Space Fund, it's one where you can see that one is kind of continually growing. And it's one where unless you have an open space land acquisition kind of policy that either A, is utilized as a type of purchase that just earmarks that open space funding to purchase something as a reduction of that fund. But if it's grant reimbursed, those grant reimbursements come back in the open space fund and the fund balance keeps on growing. So right now with our earned income tax, we have that 0.125 percentage addition on top of our 1% cap of earned income. That's all open space revenue. That was part of that voter referendum that went into effect back in the mid-2000s. And so in today's conditions with the amount of earned income tax capacity, that equates to about $500,000 in revenue just to the open space fund every single year. So that's $500,000 of revenue that can only be used for the purchase and or 25% implementation component for funding maintenance and improvements for parks. But regardless, every single year, the township gets $500,000, like I said, in the current environment to fund open space initiatives. And then, of course, we have the hydrant fund. This is if you live within 750 feet of a hydrant on your property. I can't remember what that percentage equates to in terms of a millage rate, but that is to fund the installation and then the service cost for having hydrants associated near your property. We can look at this. I call it like a miscellaneous one. This is provided as a pass-through funding from the state. So the state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they provide kind of the gross sales on fuel, and they parse it out over all of the municipalities on an algorithmic base, and we get about $400,000 solely to do 2 inches deep worth of surface improvements on road paving project. Just to let everybody know, that equates to about $400,000 per year. We can spend it down to a certain component. It kind of has issues with rollover funding in terms of like how much net you can provide. But long story short, the township's net annual, we'll call it need for critical replacements of infrastructure is about $1.5 to $1.7 million. So we're not getting as much as we need from the Commonwealth to fully fund a 3-mile incremental road replacement program, which is advisable based off of the fact that we have over 60 miles of roads, and roads only last about 20 years until you have to kind of address them. So we will, unless we have a sizable capital influx of consistent increase of cash towards our capital fund, we'll never have a year-over-year effort that does that kind of baseline replacement, so where you can get through kind of a 20-year view of all of your road needs there, unless, like I said, you have that level of funding commitment towards it, which we do not. Some of these are kind of some, we'll call them closed or in the process of closing type accounts that we still have balances. Granted, they were either set up by an intentional kind of restriction on funds, but it's one where we just had those balances and they can be invested. I think the one thing is just on the guidance of interest income on that cash. What is its purposeful use if it was a restricted fund? So that's kind of subject for interpretation there. But it's one where there is advisable cash. If we can unencumber it, it becomes liquid, and then we can put it to support other initiatives. Of course, this one is the biggest component of our entire investment funds. These are just investment funds of which the entire sewer sale one is component of it, because it's just essentially, it's not like a fund from like a replaceable revenue or resource. It's just, it was that construct of big influx of cash, and it's just sitting in an investment fund account. But just to kind of parse all this out in terms of what is considered to be kind of a big part of our strategy, the total, but when you total less sewer fund, this is kind of what I said, that $10 million and then that $5 million accordingly of like unrestricted. And you can see from our unrestricted liquid cash, we went from a $9 million position to a less than $6 million position in 3 years gross. So that's one where, like I said, we had to kind of plug the hole in our operating fund. That kind of stopped the bleeding. And then the next one is we have to solve the issue about how much capital funding we should keep kind of aside to fund critical projects of need to move forward. And then coming up with a financial strategy to fund it all. That's why we talked about growth of the township, increasing our tax base, all those kind of systemic issues that we need to address if we really want to attack our issues here in the township. So this is just, we'll kind of go through some examples. So we have some small kind of class funds with Pliget, so you can see the kind of small balances. But currently, the emphasis here is just what the net projected and waning interest rates are for 2024. You know, we kind of forecasted by an end-of-year interest rate of roughly around the 4%. This was down by about 5.5 to 5.6 on average all of last year. So rates are going down, which is cause for concern because a lot of our revenues right now, plugging a sizable portion of our general fund budget, is about yield from interest rates on that big sewer sale balance. So it's one where we will be able to kind of cover the amount based off of projected rate, but 2025, what does that mean? 2026, what does that mean? What is the floor here? How much can we actually project in the future to get a sizable return? And then from there, where's the true intent of where that money should be going? Should it be plugging our operating fund as kind of like a tax rate abatement kind of process? Or is this more dedicated to go towards capital projects? We want to see stormwater investments. We want to see infrastructure improvements for our streets, you know, other kinds of initiatives, the parks, anything that's kind of a big capital need. Where should that money be going? But it's one where still, at the end of the day, this is, I'll call it non-sustainable revenue. So it's one where it shouldn't be part of a long-term strategy because at some point, the golden goose will stop producing golden, or the goose will stop producing golden eggs there. Similar concept here. I believe I already discussed it here with the capital fund, but it's just another one where that was another part of it. Our fund balance policy, we were kind of standing by real quick for 2023 in terms of our, I'll call it aggressive approach to investing our $2.5 million fund balance, because at the time, we were still using that cash. That was part of our general fund budget. So it's one where it did make sense to invest funds that you're planning to use in that in-year component because you never really had a true understanding of what your required net position would be, all things kind of combined in and of itself. So that going forward would be a discussion about, now that we have established kind of the understanding that 2.5 equates to 35%, what should be the protection around that 2.5? And then from there, what should our investment strategy be for that 2.5? If you do my kind of, you know, 2.5 plus the, we'll call it like an 80% investable approach to it at roughly a 5%, you get to about 103. So this would potentially be just additional revenue into our general fund should we choose to do that. So it's that kind of just another floating of revenue into our general fund budget. And then what is the value add behind influxing an additional 100 grand worth of cash into our revenues? Same concept for the capital fund as well. This is one where, you know, if you protect the cash and you're using a lot of that interest income, it's one where you can invest cash while using your interest income. Right now we're using in our operating fund. If we were using in our capital fund, you could set this aside and have this return revenue while you're not using it and use that revenue to fund other capital projects. So it's one where, you know, you have a flexible strategy if that's the case, should we choose to implement that. So just more to think about. These are kind of all the other kind of combined restricted funds here. As a set aside, considering open space is one where we generally understand that we can't use it for anything else. This was the first year that the open space fund was put at a percentage rate of investable one, and this time it's producing probably about the end of the year a little over $80,000. Right now, that's just essentially a supplemental revenue add back into the open space fund balance. And of course, that's for projections to fund future capital initiatives for the open space fund. They're just trying to kind of aggregate the increase of their fund balance to get to a level where they feel like they can execute their 5-year capital plan, which is of course part of our 5-year capital plan that was adopted in our budget. So just kind of framing all of this combined, it just kind of lets you know that with all the unrestricted funds and the restricted funds, you know, the kind of total amounts that we're talking about here of just added revenue coming from the fact that we just have this cash. And so right now for unrestricted, about 1.3 million in totality is kind of projected. And then restricted fund about 123,000, and also showing you kind of where the current amount of that balance is really coming in from and the opportunities to add more into it. So this is kind of all of this combined, current and opportunity, if that makes sense. So right now we're really kind of only scratching that component right there, which is the use of the sewer fund part. Same concept right here for restricted, but I think I alluded to it in the previous part of the brief here. What is the value add for this? It's kind of all of these combined, you know, less the burden of future cost for service increases. You know, expenditures are always on a longevity chart to increase over time. That's just the fact of the world. And it's one where the only thing that we have right now is growth, with additional new revenues are coming up with, we'll call them a strategy to find revenues coming from places that we didn't necessarily think of. So that's kind of where this would be coming from. We can fund new positions if we ever need a new position of need as we identify it, fund capital projects, and of course, if you need to tap into cash for any sort of emergency fund, you now have this ability to pull from different types of cash accounts to replenish where you pulled it fund from, so you can build back your reserve position. But kind of the key component is a constant discipline. And so none of this is made possible unless you protect the underlying fund balance position. So that's one where, you know, without that fiscal discipline, we'll never be able to execute a solvent interest income strategy for the township, which right now, given our cash position, that's our number one asset that we have, is the fact that because we have this with us, we're able to do a lot of different things. So we can be very flexible year over year, which is a good thing. So that's where we kind of stop for questions, and so I'll open it up for the board and the public accordingly.
Any board members have any questions? No?
The only question I had was the guidance on, the question I had was the guidance on the 83,000 roughly that we're gonna earn. Is it still 75 and 25 for maintenance, or we don't know?
Oh, for open space?
So the fund balance, is it still broken down? Yes, just on the open space.
Yes, it's still restricted by that 25% usage
Okay.
for maintenance. Yeah, that's part of the, what was it, Act 115 update to
Right.
the overall act for open space. So right now, the maintenance is interpreted as ongoing operational maintenance and those who perform maintenance, or maintenance as quote unquote an implementation measure to improve an open space into like a park. So kind of either or. So that for us right now equates to about 125,000. And we are leveraging that. And right now that's leveraging the cost for maintenance out of our general fund and putting in the open space. So that was actually a planned reduction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any public questions? No?
Lots of fun.
Yeah.
Good times. There we go.
Gonna have to start a line.
Yeah, right.
We'll of course fold this into all kind of ongoing budget type discussions going into the FY25 planning, which my mind is already at, even though it doesn't start until August. But this is something where you can't talk about our financial outlook without a heavy component of this. So just more to follow. So, and of course, that'll give us another quarter worth of monitoring interest rates. So we have like, we need to get like this, the channel kind of with the scroller kind of going continuously, because we actually have to watch that. But we have a pretty good fluid conversation with Pliget to kind of make sure that our strategy, because we don't do the entire $22.1 million balance, we break it up into different chunks, and we break it over short and long term over the course of a fiscal year. So we always make sure that the net is always end of year this much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, then you got to open up another.
I was gonna say, is it still me?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And good evening. This is a continued brief from our roof project discussion that we had. I believe it was not last month, the month prior, I can't remember if it was February or March. But essentially, we got the results of all of our bids. We got some extra information as it was brought forward in terms of doing some more due diligence about the value adds of the different materials we were talking about for the roof. But tonight's component is going to be finalizing the decision to adopt kind of a funding plan for the final recommended roof option. So for those who weren't involved with the prior discussion, long story short, big roof, multiple materials, both of them bad and lots of holes in it. So it's one where we had a lot of issues with the, just call it, general condition of our roof. On the shingle side, just a lot of constant wind damage. When it was patched together, it was done incorrectly, which led to larger holes. The roof is not insulated, so everything coming in from the outside immediately came into the inside. And it's one where it was never really holistically addressed to be able to say that what is the true, we'll call it, number one, the net capitalization of the depreciation of the asset and of itself. So we did that. And two for the materials, what should the materials for our roof be in the first place? As it turns out, I know we had the environmental air quality kind of study and everything, and we already understand hydrogen sulfide to be corrosive, whether or not. Regardless, copper is graded as like a D to an F in terms of its resiliency grade for a usable material in this environment and of itself. So the fact that we have a lot of wind, a lot of sheeting rain, a lot of kind of storm events kind of messing up the asphalts, you mix that with the fact that the rest of half the roof is just pitting, in which case that was a huge issue with our copper material condition assessment, was essentially kind of looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. All of this leads to just leaks in the roof and general kind of, we'll call them building electrical inefficiencies, because everything just essentially just sifts through in the summer and the winter accordingly. So this was the summary of findings. If you go out and you kind of look up at the roof, you'll see kind of it just looks like this across the board for all the shingles. Those are holes. So it's one where it was assessed to be in pretty poor condition for all of those factors aside. So with that, Pannoni, our township appointed engineer, did a comprehensive roof assessment that was provided as a capital discussion in last year's thing. So this isn't a pop-up expense. This was a planned one. And they kind of gave us kind of we'll call them the general pros and cons. Of course, they're going to recommend the most structurally integrity kind of type of roof, which is the metal standing seam with an aluminum type metal option. They graded kind of as a sealed option, one that was pretty resilient. Granted, it's an unknown and also is the highest cost. So that was kind of like, all right, we know that this thing is pretty durable in all other conditions. In this conditions, we just don't truly know, and it's pretty expensive. From the asphalt side, and of course, it has a longer warranty with it. Asphalt side, it's one where, durable to a point, has a shorter life. It's one where, at least if you have to kind of repair it, you can repair it in sections, just make sure it's done properly. And then that one is it just doesn't have that long of a warranty like any other roof. So these aren't like considered to be special roofs. It's just like the one you would treat from a residence you have, but of course, it's a commercial grade component to it. And then with it, the option of the metal one came with, because the way that they would have to basically pull the entire roof off, insulation would come as an added component of that. For asphalt, it was seen as like a side cost component to it, but we also got the scoring for that as well. So we would do an insulation improvement effort with both options. And then with that, the biggest one, as you can see, the bids went out. So we had our understanding of, we just kind of put 600K as just a general offering because we had no idea. So we just kind of picked the number in the middle and went with that. But of course, the bids came back. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, the fact that we had surplus interest from last year because we leveraged mortgage cash and we didn't fund one of the the capital projects for St. Anthony's in the Hills. So we built up an interest earned income surplus from last year's budget. And it's like, we're looking at this now is what is the best use for this for capital improvement or infrastructure improvements in of themselves. And so, of course, we had a lot of kind of capital projects that were top of mind and nominated for funding. And this is where we kind of parsed out as, the roof being a critical replacement just because the building we're in has a lot of issues with it. The bid prices came back. The shingle option was much, much lower, and the metal one is much, much higher. So that's one where, at the end of the day, if you have two approaches, both of them are good. Some have pluses, some have minuses. The most feasible one from a cost implementation standpoint ends up kind of winning the day when it comes to all right, we can fund this at this level, and then we can save that remaining component and fund other initiatives as well. So it's like, how many things can we get done with one balance? So that ended up being the recommended option, was to go with the asphalt option. And I think the biggest one was obviously cost. We can fund 2 asphalt roof replacements for the price of 1. And 2 is if you're going to do a heavy investment into a metal option, you better be guaranteeing that is resilient enough, and we just don't know. That couldn't be determined. And another one too is we did discuss the solar feasibility of it, and it was one where if you house an array on top of the roof, it has limitations in terms of what that net production would be. And for us, it would only equate to about 15% of our needs here. So you're doing a massive improvement with an increase of cost to fund the actual solar in of itself. You can get kind of a discount or rebate through some different programs, but it would take 10 years to pay off that rebate. So all in, it doesn't make sense. And if we wanted to be truly energy independent, we would pick a part of New Garden Park and put a solar array there and be truly off the grid if we wanted to do it at 100%, because we will never be able to do that on our roof. So all of that combined led to the fact that, yes, it made more sense to go with the approach with the asphalt shingle option. And that's one where if we fund it, get this, we can pay for an individual year, and we don't have to finance it. So we're saving planned budget savings down the road as well. So with that, this is kind of the rundown of what I would recommend of not only nominating the asphalt option, but with that remaining surplus, what else is kind of right there at the top of mind? And of course, paving. So that's one where the plan was to kind of try to do both at the same time, and that kind of absorbed a lot of capital capacity for every single year. And it's one where if you're kind of reducing capital needs for this year, and you're saving no financing kind of capital needs for future years just for the roof, you can do more paving in the near term, and then actually more critical paving in the next few years. And then you can get through, I would consider to be right now, what we're in is kind of like a little bit of like a hurdle moment of some of these more sizable critical projects and get on the opposite side. So if you're doing that with earned one-time non-reoccurring revenues today at their highest yield, that's kind of like my recommendation is just get this, because all these costs are only going to increase over time. And so with that, given all of our paving program expenditures, we would be able to pull the entire section of Pemberton Road to the left 1 full year and completely pave Pemberton Road with the interest income surplus there. And then that allows us to actually start doing Hillendale in a sizable chunk next year, and only do it in possibly 2 years if we plan it right, rather than 3 of little chunks across the road. So in 2 years, we would complete, 2.5, because of last year's program, Star, Pemberton, and Hillendale all in kind of that one fell swoop there. And of course, those are the ones that, you know, calls for inquiries to the township. When are you guys going to pave these roads? Are probably the top ones when it comes to road conditions. So that would be my recommendation. That leaves us, you don't have to earmark every single penny. A lot of these bids kind of come in and kind of presents you with either A, some more capacity, or B, less. So to leave a little nominal balance left over. And then of course, we have some other sizable needs for this year. We have a failing culvert on Mercer Mill Road that we need to address. You know, that's one where it's a budgeted cost, not a known bid cost yet. We're going to bring this project forward with final bidding estimates in May. And then same thing with the fuel farm as well. It's kind of ARPA funded right now, but you never know until we get those final bid estimates. That'll also be in May. And then of course we have our kind of remaining component of all of the stormwater stream restoration efforts to get our sediment reduction criteria met down in St. Anthony. We're doing the one component that's funded that is up in the Smedley Preserve, the Loch Naren Golf Course. But in order to meet everything, we have to also do the section down below. And that's one where the ARPA funding from prior investments didn't cover all of it. So that's one where right now that's mostly with potential grants, mostly with some distributed cost shares with the townships to the west of us, and of course, capital cash that we have on hand. So any way that we can reduce those commitments for cash and do other kind of mechanisms here, that's what I'm saying. Just let's plan for that one. So that would be my recommendation. We don't have to approve this tonight. We can come forward to approve that later. And of course, that would yield a need for a budget amendment in the mid-year amendment cycle there for our capital projects. But just other benefits, I think I already alluded to it. Just future capital capacity, funding it with revenues that you have today is much better for future funding estimates and budget needs for tomorrow. Plus, we're funding the projects with the biggest kind of price tags on them. And the big one, also, like I said, just reducing the stress on it. But also just kind of the narrative itself. We're funding infrastructure changes. I think that's pretty important right now, considering some of the material condition of our roads. Getting through the biggest ones to show improvements kind of shows that we're serious about making those investments to where they need to be. And I think that from a kind of what the board's guidance has been is we need to find a way to get these done. So this is the most practical way to do it. So I think that's it. Any questions? Mostly about the roof tonight, but just knowing that the other paving stuff is going to be coming up in probably next month's meeting as well.
No, great presentation. Thank you, Chris. Any questions from the board? Yeah. Any questions from the public? Mr. Gall?
Will the board decide, on this, option tonight?
Yes, that's a motion we're looking to get. Yeah.
The motion to approve
Roof.
I think it's actually in the staff recommendation in the actual agenda itself, will be to approve this cost here tonight, which is the cost for the actual roof as well as the insulation and a side estimate budget for siding improvements as well. And that's actually in the agenda packet.
Great. Now, the option will not require finance,
No, not with this. Yeah.
and then it's paid for through what fund? That general fund?
It's just essentially transfers from our, basically it's interest income. So it's revenue coming from interest.
And the last question is, when will the project begin by its?
It would be this summer. Yeah. So this would be an end of this calendar year complete project, pending logistics, pending materials, pending all the stuff. So I don't want to put some bad stigma on it right now. So, but it is a planned FY24 project.
Last question, Chris, would it require any part of the township building and its day-to-day functions to have to shut down?
There will no, doubt be impact to just building operations. And so, of course, when we get those timelines with the actual, it's Jotun Inc., which is the approved, and that was provided by Pannoni as well. We'll come up with announcements in terms of just, hey, we'll have a plan like, staff remote day, so no over-the-counter type services and however long that is, but I don't have timeframes of how long it'll take to replace a, square footage of the cost of this roof, plus insulation and all the other things that we'll need to do, so, but, no problem.
Yes, the back.
Excuse me? Oh, no, it'll be, I think, 20 to 30, I think was the amount on there, so. Yeah, that was just in the original estimates and stuff like that, but, yeah. Yeah, no. And in the actual agenda packet has the construct of what Jotun is proposing. They actually put like a full warranty on there, so it's actually longer than what the estimated warranty is as well.
Okay.
Granted, it's for like shingle defects, it's not
Right.
for act of God, but that's what the insurance policy is for, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Guy?
Yeah. Oh, this quote is actually a quoted one that's locked in right now, so it's good to stay for a certain period of time. If we didn't decide for in the next 2 months, yes, we would have to go through this process again, but you never know what the bid price is. I think Pannoni provided some other inputs from some people doing similar projects, and they got different numbers as of more than a month ago. So these are variable. So
Yeah.
we have a we have a financial approach that makes sense. My recommendation is to make this decision tonight, and we will sign the quote and send it in tomorrow.
Okay.
Anything else? Nope. Okay. We have a motion to spend the money?
Yes, I'll make a motion that we approve the manager to approve the bid with Jotun Incorporated at a cost not to exceed $360,000, $360,137.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right, passes. All right, thank you for everything. Okay, then we have, did Mike want to give a presentation or this is just the ratification of the stuff we've already talked about?
Maybe I can.
Okay.
Winnie probably has the.
Yeah. So this is a new ordinance or an amendment to an existing ordinance that sounds pretty complicated, but what it really is is for all township parks. This ordinance now makes them carry in, carry out, which is a part of the Leave No Trace program, which means that the content of the ordinance says if you take trash in or anything in, you take it back out with you. If you have an animal, you take that animal's droppings, as it were, back out with you so that there won't be trash cans in the park. The township employees will not be picking up trash. Everyone who goes in the park will have to take their own trash or anything out. It does provide for a fine, so if someone discovers that you have taken something into the park and have not removed it, there are fines involved of up to, I think, $500 per day. So that's what the ordinance says. It is in fact ordinance 2024-01, the first one for this year, and it amends section 127(3) and 5 of the existing ordinances within the township. So you just need a motion to approve it. It was also was advertised in the Daily Local News on April 3rd, 2024.
Just in terms of process, this was something that was discussed early on in the fiscal year. That was just kind of the brief of the concept of adopting said ordinance and then handing it off to Winnie to craft the actual ordinance and advertise and make sure that there was no public comments provided during the announcement and public comment period. And it's also just as a means of what we talked about of the effort, the operational impact, and just in this case, some of the more egregious misuse of our receptacles within our parks. It's not just overflow of trash. It's like people doing illegal dumping efforts on site inside the park, bringing in large objects, putting them up around the trash can just because it's there. And of course, we have like one dedicated personnel really to service not just this park, but of course, as we onboard additional parks, we just saw that this was going to be a massive effort. So it was either A, carry in, carry out, which has proven to be effective, or B, a massive influx of additional personnel just to constantly clean the receptacles in the park. So this was the recommended outcome.
Okay. All right. Questions? Mr. Dungy?
No, that would require township employees to go clean that out. That's what this entire thing is to avoid. So if you take your pet in the park, then you have to have a bag with you to take back out. I'm sorry? There won't be any trash cans in the bathroom. There are no trash cans.
No.
Is that right?
Yeah, no. Just to clarify.
Restroom, okay. But it's not for animal waste and there.
Yeah, there's no perfect strategy really in place to get every single person compliant with just kind of, we'll call them common kind of decency measures. This is just one where as it's proofed out in the public, having the receptacles actually leads to worse outcomes than not having it. And that includes pet waste, which we know that people will just leave it behind. That's part of it already. So that it really doesn't change that fact. And it's one where having the bags, usually the bags get strewn about if you have them, and they actually never put them in those kind of dedicated dog receptacles as well. So those are actually a Herculean effort just to keep up with that in of itself. So it's one where it's kind of like, what's the biggest common good? It's this policy. For us, the biggest consideration here is not just outcomes at the park, but it's lack of staff actually available to do the cleanup effort in and of itself. And getting rid of those large waste deposits that we have of everything is a much lower staff effort than it would be to do maybe lighter cleanup efforts without having everything. So that's how we have to operate as a township. And this is also presented as a savings to the township because we're not wasting labor time doing just this, which I think equated to almost an hour and a half a day of just doing trash cleanup. None of the other efforts in the parks.
Okay. Rob?
You will provide, or the way I understand it, you will provide trash receptacles for township events in the park, right?
Yes.
That's correct. That'll be vendor provided, and it's like bring it in and bring it out to support solely for those events.
And someone has private event, there
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, right? For ice cream day and,
Yes, yeah, like events will be supported. This is like everything dies down, no one leaves, because that's another one too, where it's like during an active event, no one's bringing in like an old refrigerator and putting it in the township park. So it's one where it's really those times where no one's there, there's no staff support, there's no event. That's the kind of down times where a lot of the misuse kind of happens in the first place. And that's what we're trying to affect with this situation. So events will still be hosted or still be supported. And of course, the expectation is if you rent, you clean up after you're done with your pavilion rental.
anyone else? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the ordinance?
I'd like a motion to adopt ordinance number 24001.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Great. Okay, I think Chris, you're up again.
Yes, and I think I can handle this one because there's no planned presentation for it, but more of just an administrative recommendation for one of the things that we had planned to do some improvements on. It's just mostly in the effort of actually executing both in development and execution of our annual budget. Right now, our financial system doesn't provide that type of service. So all budgeting is done manually outside of the financial system. So all of the, AR, AP, payroll, all that kind of administrative effort, invoicing, everything is fine in terms of actual management of the day-to-day financial transactions. But as it pertains to the budget, there's no consolidated resource for everybody to go to see its actual net impact on the budget within our financial system. This was one where our provider had given us an understanding, and this wasn't within our recommended ARPA budget. Just want to make sure that everyone, this is a funded ARPA initiative. It was one where they had kind of alluded to the fact that they were developing a solution. And the longer that promise has kind of gone on, the less likely it was that they were actually going to deliver on a solution. So this is their second solution, which is an integration with a secondary system that they already have in place. So this is one where we're familiar with the type of technology. We've used it in the past, just not in its full operational, efficient capacity that we could have used it, because we didn't use it for operational budgeting. We didn't use it for the actual construct of the budget document in of itself. Going in this manner and doing it to actually support all those endeavors actually makes it considerably easier for staff not only to execute the budget, but also for us to be able to transpose everything into a public transparency item in a medium that shows exactly where we are with very little staff manipulation to update those numbers. So the goal is to kind of have like an inside out approach to where everybody's on the same common system. And then what you're getting on the outside is the aggregate of all those inputs on we'll call them like a weekly type update, because it's not daily, but it would be continuous throughout the fiscal year. And so this would be my recommendation, was to invest the component of our remaining ARPA funding as an administrative enhancement for our use of technology, which is part of our overall strategy as a township, which is, given kind of our footprint of personnel and the fact that we all kind of have common denominator usage, specifically within our financial system, not having budget software was a big missing piece of that. So this is a huge value add for us, as well as I believe the community, because you will get better granular detail at that aggregate level. So any questions about this? Happy to answer.
No? Any questions? Anything public? Okay,
Motion to authorize township manager to approve the quote from ClearGov at a cost not to exceed $17,833.33.
Seconded.
okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, great. Then we have a motion to approve an extension for Rouse Chamberlain.
Yeah. The Board of Supervisors approved the Rouse Chamberlain development on Bancroft Road in March by Resolution 2024-06. They've asked for 130 days to extend the time before they have to come forward with their financial security by 130 days. And that's what the resolution does. Everything for the original approval resolution stays in place. They still have to do everything that they have to do under that resolution. It just extends the time by 130 days.
20 days?
No, 130.
Really? Oh,
They,
versus
120 would have put it a week before. Yeah, they asked for 120.
But you added on. the
I
10 'cause the
suggested
meeting.
130, so then it gets us past our October meeting. So
Okay.
just a motion to approve that.
Okay, do you have a motion to approve the?
So
extension?
you're recommending 130 days to get us to the next meeting?
Yes, because otherwise it ended on October 14th, which
Right.
meant we would have to do something in September, so it really isn't 120 days.
Agreed.
To make it 130, it gets past our October meeting. So that was my suggestion, which their attorney agreed with.
Okay. So I'll make a motion to approve the resolution 24-007. And that's to extend the recording for the plan with an expiration of
October 24th.
October 24th of 2024.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. All right, passes. Then we have manager report.
All right. All right, sounds good. So, I know I can whack it. So I wanted to essentially interject a time in the agenda, kind of a manager time to provide some just kind of updates about some crafted policies, maybe some recommendations, some ongoing matters with the township, of which one of them was essentially the concept of itself of adoption of a fiscal policy. And kind of, I think I alluded to it in the prior discussion, but we'll kind of go over here pretty generally at a high level of what the elements of what a fiscal policy means, and of course, what the value is in terms of its return to the township. Biggest one being guidance and doctrine to stay kind of committed to make sure that you're always on kind of like a solvent path, or at least understand when you have symptoms that you need to solve to get back on the solvent path. So kind of think of it like you're adopting the kind of what do they call them, the bumpers in a bowling alley lane. You're kind of putting the bumpers closer together so you don't get off track. Like I said, I'm coming here with all the super fun topics to talk about today, but these are ones that will help kind of hopefully keep with your inputs and guidance, the township on a solvent approach here. But biggest one is just what is a fiscal policy? So for the big one is, kind of the big takeaways here. It's just a strategic long-term approach to financial management for the township. What are the outcomes we want as a township, and what is the doctrine to our financial approach that will keep us on staying on track for those long-term good outcomes? So institutionalizing good management, fiscal policy will outlast all of us if you kind of keep it around as a general guiding document. So it's always one that makes sure that not just what we're doing is good for today's purposes, but 30, 50, 100 years down the road as well. Clarify and crystallize strategic intent for financial management. You want to align all of your policies to how you're going to essentially be understanding how the development of future and current financial practice will manage resources as well to provide what we always kind of look for here in local government, which is the continual approach to funding community services. That's kind of what we're in the business of. Define your boundaries. That's kind of more of a framework of which we can actually make sure that we're not over restricting the guidelines here. So we do have some sense of flexibility in terms of, this is the overall boundary, but we can kind of operate within, because year over year, there will be differences in kind of the available options that you have just based off of the position that you're in. Good bond ratings, reduction of borrowing. Right now we're not in a position where we need to truly finance or borrow, and not just talking about financing, but the issuance of general obligation debt as a municipality. We've been in that situation in the past, and without a fiscal policy, therefore you don't have a credit rating. You don't have a credit rating, you're going to be subject to higher rates. You have higher rates, it means you're only paying more over the long run. So mostly what like a Moody's or an S&P will be looking for, day one, they show up, they'll say, show me all your financial statements, show me all of your audits, and show me your fiscal policy. Right now, we can probably answer two of those. So it's one where this is one because this shows them how much they can kind of give you the well and good faith type effort to allow it to be at a lower rate. Plus, it's a good measure of the financial management practices of the township. So it's one where you kind of get like a net A-esque rating that's seen as, okay, they are good with managing their money. You know, if you're getting those kind of like lower ones, that's ones where, you know, maybe needs improvement, but that's one where you have kind of a sense of a direction of where you're at. And then from there, if you get a lower rating than you want, how do we get that higher rating? And it gives you a path to like, you know, getting up to par where you feel like you should be as a township. Some of these other ones, like I said, they're all kind of play off each other, but I think we get a sense that it's just the helping us understand how we want to manage our finances, both in the near and long term. And of course, for those unfamiliar, this is essential public financial management practice. Having a fiscal policy is just what is conditioned as a financial management or practitioner of public funding in and of itself. So all of these associations that I am uniquely aware of, if people aren't, we'll bring these adopted recommendations to light so everybody can understand that we're not just pulling this out of thin air. These are nationally adopted standards, and we're just kind of entering into it. Granted, the measures to date have kind of been fleshed out more for adjusting to our local township, and then, of course, picking the options because there's a list of different fiscal policies, but certain ones don't really pertain to our current conditions, certain ones do. So we had to kind of edit this. So this is part of a longer process that's been done between admin, finance, in terms of coming up to a collective recommendation that will, if you're interested, bring this forward into more of an adopted policy moving forward too. These are kind of the areas that we'll be talking about today, kind of all the, kind of call them categories of what we would be considering. And of course, we'll go into them pretty quickly here, each and of them at a high level here. So maintaining the balanced budget, pretty, it sounds kind of self-explanatory, but this is one where we weren't doing this as of over a year ago. So this is one where this kind of structures it into our DNA that we're always going to have a maintaining a balanced budget approach every single adoption of fiscal year cycle moving forward. And of course, what does it mean to have it? And that's one where achievement of a balanced budget, you have to kind of consider kind of what's unique to Pennsylvania that's not unique to other local governments. And of course, in Pennsylvania, you're allowed to have a balanced budget using your own cash. That's not a recommended national approach. That's a Pennsylvania thing. And it gets a lot of townships and municipalities into a pretty precarious situation because that in and of itself as a practice can become institutionalized, and then you're out of cash. And then what happens? So it's one where it might be seen as a good measure, but over the long run, it never ends well unless you have some sort of, you know, massive influx of revenues that kind of allow you to essentially replenish that cash position. But second-class townships, given our revenue streams, you know, we're not one where we can just kind of pull levers randomly, which is why we're using interest income in the first place to fund our budget. So not only how to maintain it, but also what are we going to be doing to non-comply? So this is kind of like a recommended kind of transparency component of it. Why are we in an imbalanced position? Talking about it publicly. What are we going to do to get back into it? For those unfamiliar, for if you're a distressed locality in Pennsylvania, it's called Act 47. It's kind of multiple years in the red where you've shown that you're in kind of like a financial distress situation. The two outcomes there is get you on a strategic financial management plan to get you back into the black, or B, you just become so fiscally depressed or distressed as a municipality that you have to be absorbed by the state and just kind of lose your status as a local government. Those are kind of the two outcomes. So if one where you're not kind of in a well kind of managed position and you don't have kind of a reorganization effort behind your balanced budget approach, you know, those are your two kind of paths after the fact. So hopefully that's one where this township never has to go into, which is an Act 47. Fund balance policy. This is one I kind of alluded to in the prior brief. What are those percentage acceptable levels of fund balance per account that we have? General fund, capital reserve, open space. We can go all the way down the line. What are those percentages that we think we should have on hand to manage the required, I'll call them cash level to absorb emergencies, to absorb kind of other kinds of things, rainy day type stuff, you name it. What are those acceptable reserve positions? And then placing that into a percentage threshold that says we're always going to make sure that we are reporting our fund balances at these levels. And if you're not, what's your replenishment strategy? So kind of the same approach. Also another one is unassigned fund balance when it comes to like surpluses and deficits. Of course, deficit, you can't really think of where you're going to put it because you don't have it. So you have to figure out where you're going to pull it from. But in a surplus, if it's like a one-time type expenditure versus a surplus from a revenue from taxes, treating those in different manners. If it's a surplus from interest, one-time revenue, what's the best use for this? If it's a surplus from taxes, what's the best use for that? Capitalization policy. This was never really brought into effect for this township because we didn't have a capital plan from a long kind of multi-year view. We had kind of an in-year kind of funding element to it. So this allows us to kind of construct things into a column like a net depreciation of all assets. Of course, this is always measured for the township because of our audit, and we have to report on all of our assets that we have because that creates your kind of total cash and net assets position. But you also have to understand what is the longevity of these things as well. Because of course, your roof, for instance, 20 years ago, valued at this. 20 years later, it's down here. So you don't have that asset anymore. So that's one where understanding kind of what that means in terms of your reportable assets is a part of that. Other one is just defining what a capital component is. For those, it's usually like a threshold of a monetary amount as well as a multi-year view that's seen as like a non-recurring expense. That's kind of pushes it from general fund into capital fund. And it's one where we're still going through a fine-tooth comb monitoring expenses to pull additional items out of general fund and put them in the capital fund because that's where they belong. This policy allows us to kind of structure that a little bit more. I'm thinking in terms of things like public works commodity expenditures and single-time uses. It might be reoccurring, but every year it's kind of a varying expense. That's one where you can think of it in those terms. General cash management. This is one where you're just looking at all of how you manage just kind of ongoing over-the-counter type transactions, both from just an AR, accounts receivable, and AP, accounts payable approach. These are just kind of general high-level provisions of it, but just making sure that everything you're doing is within the guise of like good cash management kind of stuff, you know, not leaving checks out on the countertop, stuff like that, all the way down to how should we be funding our AP obligations, how should we be paying things, and then kind of what are the, you know, general pros and cons behind how you're doing your payments. You know, I'm one where obviously there is a kind of a institutional reliance on checks and cash, especially checks, but it's also one where I know people have common misconceptions about the use of cards and the use of kind of electronic transactions, but they are significantly less risk at fraudulent types of activities than it is obviously for checks. So it's one where getting us out of that lessens our risk. We just talked about this earlier, but the investment policy, also one that, you know, creating like what we talked about today, we would construct that into a quarterly type report. You know, what do we have invested? What are our rate environment? What are our amounts that we have there? So it's also one where we're not only doing the investments and kind of understanding the construct of how we can invest, but also what is our investment report, what is our investment performance doing over the course of a fiscal year? And then monitoring that. This is another one where, you know, we've been practicing this in the past, but it's been one where, you know, there's kind of been some like varying results in terms of like who we are funding from like a nonprofit perspective. But it's one where we want to define our contribution policy. Who are we contributing to? What are they doing? What's their solvency on their side? Making sure that we aren't just kind of pushing money in one direction, and it might not necessarily be something that's coming back into the township, which is the whole reason we're funding them in the first place. So it's kind of like a give and take type relationship. This would allow us to kind of say that we're going to be making sure that those who we are funding are compliant in their own regard. So we know that we're giving the best use of public funds towards another resource that provides benefits in our community. Debt management, that's another one. This is actually a much larger section in the actual policy draft in of itself. Just wanted to pull some fun highlights out of here. But long story short, it's just, you know, the way that we're at right now, it's kind of a less, we'll call them recommended option, but at some point we will need to have debt as a part of a financing solution towards some sort of unforeseen capital. I'll kind of knock on wood for that one, but more than likely like a stormwater type initiative or something like that is probably one where you're going to look at something like this, as well as probably like a sizable transportation type initiative. But just making sure that we understand how we're managing the debt as part of a construct of an adopted policy. And that's really it. If this is something that's amenable to the board, you think it's a good idea, we'll bring forward the crafted document in May in terms of a draft mode. You can look through it, review it, provide commentary. We'll re-update this. If people want to see this, awesome presentation one more time, feel free. But it's one where I would say that this is something seen as a missing piece of the financial management puzzle for our township. So any questions?
Any board members have questions? No. Anyone from the public? No? Well, great job. Thanks.
Yeah, there's no motion on this one. It's just proceed on course.
Yes, please.
Getting through all these pretty fast. All right, next one. This is more of a working thing. Pulling this up here. So another one I wanted to talk to you about tonight is just, and like I said, I'm already in budget mode, but one where we don't necessarily have kind of a framework of how we prioritize budget kind of constructs and categories and how we're going to invest not only funding, but just time, energy, and effort by staff to do so. So leading into anything, I know we talked about just not having like a strategic plan as kind of that folded medium that goes in between comprehensive plan and budget plan. So this is kind of one where it kind of bridges that gap for being able to say that this is kind of how we are going to prioritize things. Now, you'd like to say all these categories, they're all important and we want to do all of them at once at the same time, but that's not always feasible. So it's one where putting a number next to it, having that kind of collective aggregate score of different priorities across the board would be a good kind of transparent process to say, this is what we as a board and staff are recommending to the public in terms of funding kind of levels. Some of these might actually have funding commitments. Some of them are more just kind of, like I said, time, energy, and effort types of projects, but it's showing that these are points of emphasis that we're really working on today. So these are the ones that I could extrapolate out of our comprehensive plan, kind of some common issues that have come up over the course of the last, 15 months since being here at the township. And I would just say that for the board, we'll provide these as Excel kind of worksheets to every single member. You'll be able to score it 1 through 9 to where I think I came up with 9. If you had other categories that you wanted to provide, and then provide that back to me, and at a future meeting, probably leading into, because doesn't have to be done in the next month, so please take time to think about everything, maybe engage your stakeholders, whoever you want to talk to, but definitely in time before we prepare the updated kind of state of the township brief. I delivered that first one. It was kind of like an initial kind of health check of where we were, more so than an update on where we're going. So this year, I'd like to start switching that into more of like, this is kind of the fluidity between last year to this year in terms of where we are per performance, where some initiatives are coming, and highlighting the approach to how we're constructing the budget based off of our priorities. And then, of course, this would be into our adopted budget and how we report that as well. So any questions about this effort in and of itself? Like I said, these are just recommended areas. You can definitely dive into them and provide more clarity or other additional categories, but it's a helpful exercise, I think, as not just a board, but actually translating that in the public forum to the residents and businesses, and helps provide better guidance for staff. So any questions about this?
No? Any questions? Any questions from the public? No? Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.
Getting through these, all right.
Yeah.
All right. So I just wanted to provide a quick update of where we are in the zoning project, which is essentially we're at the very, very beginning. And so Wednesday, and of course, this came after the approval of Michael Baker International, who was the winning awardee from our RFP process to seek their services to help support us through this roughly 18-month initiative as a community, and kind of all the details were kind of essentially staff discussed in terms of that initial kickoff meeting with the kind of core individuals that are going to be leading the effort from a staff. And then, of course, where does it go from there in terms of timelines and immediate actionable next steps here? So not to rush into it, this is going to be a very, very long process. So this is the overall project kind of timeline, if you will. And so we're right here, we're in diagnosis mode. So right now, this is kind of providing them, they call it like a discovery, a lot of documentation review, a lot of them looking at us as like a, general observer of everything. They'll be coming out here to perform like a site tour, probably for either a day or 2 days, just going around the township, getting a sense of the community, kind of where some of the things that they're seeing is just them putting on their, consultant hats, if you will, and marrying that up with all of our documentation as well. And the documentation isn't just the comp plan and some of those planning documents we have. It's also a full review of all of our prior zoning hearing cases. It's a lot of information pulled together. They're trying to get assessment of like what's going on here. And of course, in addition to what we've been informing them as well. And then of course, you can see that kind of goes into the evaluation process. This is mostly with staff. It's also going to be with the task force that needs to be dedicated as kind of a cross-section of our planning commission, which is a component of the kind of twofold requirements. You have to have a planning commission-led task force that prepares and presents the final ordinance of itself. So that's part of the municipal planning code. It's also part of the grant criteria to seek reimbursement for this effort in the first place. And of course, as you can see, all along the way here, there's going to be moments in time for public outreach. And so it's one where there's going to be planned kind of like town hall style presentations here at the building. I think there's roughly 4 of those. There's going to be the deliberate sessions with both the planning commission and the board of supervisors. And then of course, that's more at the end of the process because those are more like official type of implementation or adoption measures. And then all throughout this, it's not because it doesn't have to be a consultant-led effort. It's staff bringing, like I'm doing right now, bringing the results of those ongoing discussions, both from the task force as well as synthesizing maybe the minutes of a public meeting, just to make sure that we're always telling people exactly where we're at month over month over the course of 18 months. So a lot of communication. This is a heavy communication effort, and we can't get here with a successful adoption process if we're not getting everybody kind of understanding of what's going on prior to it. If this is kind of shrouded in some sort of obtuse process, then this will be heavily amounts of contention at the very, very end there. So the hope is to have this kind of everybody on the same page. You will have a little bit of any sort of kind of probably pushback at any process where you're changing things, but the hope is to kind of make sure that everybody is at least a general consensus of what's going to be done and are actually supported. So the immediate next steps for us is to establish a task force. Like I said, this is a required component to be in compliance with the grant and the municipal planning code. That's what we have to do as a township. So not a whole lot for us, just to deliberately think about who we want to be, or not necessarily who, but the categorical cross-section of stakeholders, if you will. And then the consultant, they're doing all of this review. They'll be here for a site tour. I can't remember if it was going to be at some point in the beginning of May. And then, of course, they're going to give us a summary diagnosis memo. That's going to be a public document. We'll provide the results of that in the next available meeting. So the task force in themselves, they have their list of engagements along the way. And it's one where you can kind of somewhat elaborate outside of the municipal planning code and the grant requirements to have planning commissioners plus additional folks. And as a recommendation to the board, we got agreement from Chester County Planning Commission in terms of making sure that we weren't out of compliance with either categories, to make sure that we were incorporating in those kind of other, I'll call them like stakeholder elements to the actual task force in and of itself. So we're going to be seeking some additional measures of experts when it comes to like land use outcomes and zoning law use, because obviously the Planning Commission, that's our expert panel. But we do have some ones that provide specific inputs that have been identified in our comprehensive plan, and we would want to seek those inputs because, we also have revitalization of Tough Canyon as a big part of our comprehensive plan strategy. We also have economic expansions of our business and industry in terms of expansionary commercial use. That's a big part of it. So we might want to have inputs from that community for those uniquely involved in those categories or areas of expertise in this, as long as they have, like I said, like a somewhat of a above the lay person type understanding of zoning regulations, as well as land use outcomes. And of course, schools is a component of that, because anything about zoning, especially when it comes to like residential density constructs, you're going to have a heavy emphasis from those thinking that the immediate outcome is going to be a significant weight on schools. Of course, you impact schools, you impact taxes, and that's a big part of that public dialogue. So to have schools involved with that would be kind of that missing component, because they're not a township organization, but they're 100% in our township, and they're very much a part of the property tax footprint for a resident or business within our township. Plus, they have those kind of forecasting expertise that we don't necessarily have as well. So bringing them into the fold would actually be very helpful and part of my recommendation. So these aren't just kind of like teaching sessions. These are workshops. These are like you sit down, you get homework you had to have done before you arrived at the meeting, actionable outcomes, 2-hour kind of specific deliberate discussions, and we need to get to understandings of making decisions along the way. So you can't be hung on this topic when you get to here. Otherwise, the entire project kind of falls through, which is why I said making this more of a scoped and expert type panel is kind of the intent as well. There'll be plenty of opportunities for general public as well, but we want to make sure that we're also limiting the amount of membership solely because scheduling, having too many chefs in the kitchen, making sure that it's always the same group that can be kind of assisting the effort. It's one where it's a pretty, there's a reason the planning commission itself is more than 7 members. There's a reason that some of these committees aren't more than like 5 or 7 members. It's because when you have a large consensus of population of people, it's very difficult to get to a consensus and it's very difficult to make decisions. And just schedule people to be in the same room at the same time. So that's one where even the consultant and the planning commission both said that this is different than a comp plan exercise. This is a different type of process you're going through. So of course, this is, like I said, so as long as the board is understanding that these are the types of categories that we want to have involved with the process, we've already vetted it with those groups, the planning commission and the consultant themselves, and they both said that this is a good cross-section based off of what they know about our community to date. The zoning project in terms of opportunities for public engagement, forecasted meeting 1 is in June. Meeting 2 will be in September, so you can think about it every like 3 to 4 months, roughly, throughout the process. And these are kind of like the concepts of how those meetings will be done here. Of course, everything will be in person as the kind of, town hall kind of component to it, but of course, everything will be broadcast and recorded publicly as well. So for those who can attend, you can at least see the recorded session and follow up with comments as well. And of course, like I said, the final state is the adoption process for public meetings. Like I said, this is where the rubber meets the road, and you hope that this is more of a result of good process in and of itself. So we want to make sure that these are more of like final adjudication of the implementation process and not necessarily part of the continuation of the discussions themselves. And any questions?
Any questions from the board? No? Question from the public? No? Looks great.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.
So we will, like I said, with the appointments there, we'll basically construct the task force here over the course of the next month. And then, of course, they will have a specific kickoff meeting here, probably within May.
Great.
All right. And I think that is all I have on the agenda. If there's no
Yep.
other further questions.
No, yeah, we just have the resolutions we passed. And just as a reminder, we have Christie? No, not for me. Okay, and then just as a reminder, we have the primary election tomorrow. So this is one of the voting places if you're here in South One. Otherwise, be sure to get out and vote. And I think that's everything. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn the meeting.
Have a second? All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nope. All right. Meeting is adjourned. All right. Thanks to everyone that stuck around.